Welcome to the Past Life Awakening Institute podcast. I'm Mark Beal, a past life regression therapist and trainer. Today we have with us Andy Meyers. He's a psychic medium, an inspirational speaker, and life coach. And he's a best-selling author of 3 award-winning books. So welcome to the podcast, Andy.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark. I appreciate it.
Okay, my pleasure. So we're here to talk about and celebrate your new book, your 4th book coming out on January 11th. That's called The Sky Diaries, A True Story of Reincarnation. And that describes Andy and his family's discovery of tangible evidence that have all lived in past lifetimes together. So Andy, you're there in Omaha, Nebraska at the moment, is it?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, right smack dab in the middle of the United States. And, it's a kind of a conservative part of the country, but people are always surprised at how open-minded the population here in Omaha is. It's a city of not quite 1 million people, but it's just kind of a hotbed for spirituality and kind of new age phenomena. So people are, really excited about this kind of thing, reincarnation and medium work and past life regressions. There's so many expos and workshops in town. For a city that its size, Omaha is a pretty interesting place to be.
And you also tour the United States, giving inspirational talks, conducting psychic events, and giving psychic readings. And as you say, you're known for your expertise in past lives and reincarnation and your insights into the spirit world. So you're finding the US in general is also pretty well in tune with these kind of things nowadays?
Yeah, I think it varies quite a bit depending on what region you're in. Obviously, the whole West Coast is, notorious for being, extremely open-minded. But I think as a whole, the country is just becoming a bit more accepting, not just about psychic phenomenon, but about, everything from the afterlife to, aliens and UFOs, with these new government releases. So I think slowly but surely people are becoming a bit more open to the possibility that there's more to our reality than meets the eye.
So Andy, you've got a website. So before we get into it, I want to let people know they can find you on andymyersonline.com. And so if you're interested in the work that Andy does, check him out there.
Yeah, and it's a good resource for pretty much anything. If you would like to get more information or purchase any of my books, my workshops and classes are listed on there, many of which nowadays have been offered on Zoom and digitally since COVID and everything. But yeah, andymyersonline.com if you're interested. And I do sessions for people all over the world, Australia, England. Got some people in Hawaii. Always makes me jealous when I'm on the phone with somebody who's in a beautiful part of the world, laying on a hammock at the beach. But yeah, check out my website if you're interested.
So Andy, your new book, The Sky Diaries, just looking at it, it raises many areas of interest. So I've had a look at about 5 things I think are key to discuss today. So just to let people know the kind of things we'll cover in the next hour or so. You're a psychic medium, and so part of your discoveries about these past lives came through hypnosis. So I'd be interested to talk about that. And also, this is a story about your family. It includes a fairly young daughter. So she's remembering her previous lifetime. So that's the second. Thirdly, a near-death experience is in there. So we can discuss that. And then the subject of guardian angels comes up. And that's something that comes up quite a lot when we're doing past life regression specifically as well. And then fifthly, you've got a lot of mind-blowing synchronicities, which are often signposts in the spiritual way. So it's quite a lot to cover. But before we get to that, can we just talk about you being a psychic? And often there are 2 phases with that. There's sort of getting insights and discovering you're a psychic, and then now you're a professional psychic, so you're working with others. So how did you first get insight into your own psychic abilities?
Yeah, I think every person's journey is unique on, how they fall into this line of work. And I guess the most ironic thing is, I never imagined myself being a psychic medium. So that's kind of the ironic humor of a psychic who can't predict his own future. But, since childhood, I had really interesting occurrences, of objects mysteriously moving in my bedroom, sensing the presence of spirits, knowing what was going to happen before it happened. So, I had those little intuitive moments. Wasn't really sure how any of it fit together at a young age. I always knew that I wanted to help people for a living, so I went into social work. And so I worked at after school programs and, youth facilities, and really my near death experience in the fall of 2006. I believe I have sleep apnea. So I believe what happened was I had stopped breathing in my sleep. And, literally through my bedroom ceiling, I saw out into the cosmos. I saw swirling galaxies and colorful nebulas, and I was enveloped by a loving presence, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. But I felt my spirit separating from my body and floating up into the ether, and at that moment, I was speaking with some form of intelligence, some higher power, and I conveyed to this presence that I wasn't actually ready to go yet, that my time wasn't up, that I had something big and important that I needed to do with my life that involved helping a lot of people. And when I came to from that experience, that's when I felt my intuition begin to heighten. So then I was suddenly starting to sense and feel, and I was getting this information from complete strangers, having these feelings of what was going on in their life, and information about their family was popping into my head, which was kind of strange. And, with my background in mental health, I was starting to worry that I was, going crazy, and I was just starting to wonder if these were delusions or hallucinations. And thankfully, with support from friends and family, I started to approach some of these strangers to verify and validate if what I was sensing was accurate. And for my own mental health, I was relieved that the information generally made sense. Thank goodness. From that point, I was given the opportunity to appear on some radio stations and to give psychic readings live on the air. And from that moment, that kind of helped me make the transition from social worker to psychic. And yeah, and in the meantime, I meet a lot of interesting people. I hear a lot of fascinating stories from clients, stories about angels and miracles and ghost stories and synchronicities and past lives. And, so I use a lot of these stories and content for, to put in my books. And, but the craziest one of all is my life story. It's so the Sky Diaries is my autobiography. It's not just my family's life story, but it's a story of how we were linked and connected in previous lifetimes. And this book is thick enough it could be a doorstop, Mark. I mean, you could do some damage if you hit somebody with this thing. It's thick and it's heavy, and it's 380 some pages, 350 some pages. And it's I keep telling people, if you're looking for a story that's unlike anything you've ever heard before, this book might be right up your alley, especially if you're intrigued by past lives and guardian angels. Yeah, so it's been a wild scenic route to get here, but I wouldn't have it any other way, because as if you could go back in time and change one little thing, you probably wouldn't, because all the experiences, both good and bad, they lead us to who we are nowadays, right?
Yeah. You said you were doing social work before. You've been a full-time psychic medium for how long now?
Actually, January 1st, 2010. So I started the first day of the new decade as this is my full-time profession. So yeah, gosh, what is that? 12 years now, somewhere in that ballpark.
That's great. And so, and that's a significant thing, isn't it? Just having that shift of being a full-time professional. So did you do specific training or development?
For me, it was kind of just finding my own unique style. Looking back at my schedule back then, I don't know if I was overly ambitious or just playing crazy, but I was doing a lot of sessions each week, sometimes up to 6 or 7 a day. On the weekends, I would do psychic parties where I'd be giving, 20 sessions, 20 small sessions to a group of people. And so it was just a matter of rolling up my sleeves and doing as many sessions as possible to get more experience. And thankfully, early on, I was feeling the presence of my guardian angel. I have a Native American guardian angel named Henry. And early on, before I had confidence, Henry was kind of holding my hand intuitively, and I could, lean on him as he was oftentimes providing me information about the client that I was speaking with. So, that went on for a period of time, for a year or two. And then I felt his presence slowly back off a little bit, as almost like he was letting me take the steering wheel to really find my own groove. And at that point, that's when the mediumship really took off, because I realized I no longer needed to rely on Henry for my psychic information. I could actually contact and communicate with the deceased relatives of the people that I was helping. So yeah, so that was kind of my process. And again, I think each psychic, each medium, perhaps even each past life regressionist or hypnotherapist has their own unique style. Some are perhaps more blunt, some are more patient and take their time. um some have larger than life personalities, and some are very gentle and sweet. But for me, I try to keep my style fluid, because as you know firsthand, meeting with so many different people of different walks of life, you can't always take a standard cookie cutter approach. Sometimes you have to change your style slightly to make the client more comfortable. You have to adapt to their energy, if you will.
Sure. And the key there is you develop your style by getting experience. So even though I'm a trainer and I have people study my material, when I do my professional certification training, the emphasis is here's the assignment, go and do sessions and tell me how they go. I'll mentor you through it. And so I think a lot of people do get stuck in the studying. And the key is just practice. And so when I hear you say, I just practiced, 6, 7 sessions a day, I'm thinking, yeah, that's how you do it. That's how you develop your style and get good.
Well, yeah, I mean, because it's like you could study for your whole life on how to be a good sailor, but at the end of the day, you gotta take your boat out on the ocean and get it wet and figure out how to do things right. Sometimes you figure out the right way to do things by messing up and doing them the wrong way. But it's experience is ultimately the most valuable thing.
Let's get into the Sky Diaries and some of this life story. The key characters is you, your daughter,
Mhm.
and her mother. So who are the three key characters? And did all three of them recall past lives?
Yeah, yes. To make a long story short, and the title, "The Sky Diaries," is actually a play on words. My daughter's name is Sky, SKY, and the front book cover is her reaching up to touch a gorgeous sunset. And actually, the sky itself, sunsets, shooting stars, things like that have there's a lot of undertones regarding that in the book. So being a psychic medium, actually, this book wouldn't have happened if I didn't take that leap into becoming a psychic medium, because my daughter's mom, her name is Kenzie, and she's one of the key figures in this book. So she came to me on February 3rd, 2011. She came to me for a psychic reading. It was a cold day, and it was early on in my career. Obviously, I had only been full time for about a year at that point. And so we're doing her session, and like always, I'm giving her information about her guardian angels, her past life, her future predictions, things like that. And I identified one of Kenzie's guardian angels as a female Native American named Sarah. And it was kind of funny in the moment because Kenzie chuckled and she says, "Wow, I have always known that I had this spirit named Sarah around me." And so in that moment, she felt very comforted, and I felt validated. And then I was telling her about my guardian angel Henry, and we were just talking about Native American things. And because she's 1/4 Lakota Sioux, so she is part Native American. And as we're talking about her future, I predicted that someday Kenzie would have a very, very special daughter, and there'd be something unique about this daughter. She would be an intuitive old soul who was great with animals, and she was destined to change the world in some meaningful way. And as I'm talking about the guardian angels and predicting that Kenzie would someday have a daughter, there was a glass candle in my office that exploded, and it just popped. It sounded like a crack from a whip, and glass comes falling down to the floor, and I had to blow the candle out. And we didn't know it at the time, but in hindsight, we wonder if that was our guardian angels, Henry and Sarah, telling us to pay attention to the significance of this conversation. So a little time goes by, and as fate would have it, Kenzie and I actually fell in love, got married, and discovered, wow, this daughter that I predicted is supposed to be our daughter together. So I say, wow, I just feel like her name has to be Sky. I've always been fascinated with sunsets and constellations and shooting stars, not to mention my near-death experience, to see the universe itself through my bedroom ceiling. So we fall in love, get married, and we know that someday we're going to have this daughter named Sky. Meanwhile, Kenzie gets a past life regression. And in the regression, the hypnotherapist asks her who's with her in this previous lifetime. And she says, my husband, Andy's with me. And then she was asked the question, well, who else is present? And her response was Henry and Sarah Cloud. And the other interesting thing that she saw in that past life regression was images of me getting shot in the stomach by an arrow and dying slowly in a tent or teepee all by myself. Now, after the past life regression, Kenzie comes and tells me all this information, and my jaw's hanging open in disbelief, because first of all, I had never told her, I had never told anybody that I had always had this intuitive feeling that I was a Native American in the 1800s and that I died from getting hit by an arrow in the stomach. So her past life regression validated this intuitive hunch that I had had my whole life. So that for me was statistically improbable for her to come up with the exact same images. The second shocking realization was she told me, Henry and Sarah Cloud, that's the name of our best friends. When the hypnotherapist asked her who was with us, she said, our best friends, Henry and Sarah Cloud. And I was confused because I said, well, Henry as in my guardian angel, Henry, and Sarah as in your guardian angel, Sarah. And she said, yeah. But we were trying to figure out what was with the last name Cloud. We had never heard of that name. So a little time goes by, and in Kenzie's closet, just a day or two later, in an old shoebox in a bin, she finds an old family tree that was given to her years ago by her father, who was estranged from the family. And sure enough, she's looking at this family tree, and going back to the mid 1800s, her great 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 grandparents were named Henry and Sarah Cloud. And so right there, we pieced together, Kenzie had reincarnated back into her own family tree. And roughly 175 years ago, we were best friends with her great 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 grandparents, who have since become our guardian angels. So that was quite remarkable. And the other synchronicity, this is a humdinger, during the regression, when the hypnotherapist asked Kenzie what her name was back in that past lifetime in the 1800s, Kenzie's response was Magpia. Now, we don't speak the Lakota language of the Sioux tribe. She's never learned the language. But with a little research and digging, we learned that the Lakota word, the Native American word for Magpia, is sky. So I unknowingly named our daughter what Kenzie's name was in a previous lifetime. And that's all these discoveries take place in the first, roughly the first third of my book. From there, it gets even stranger, some of the synchronicities and things that we uncovered. And ultimately, the book culminates with when my daughter when Sky was old enough to begin talking. Right around 3 and 4 is actually when it happened. She started to have memories of who she used to be. And then the whole story comes full circle to discover that Sky is actually one of my family members that I lost long ago, somebody who I was really close with. And that family member came back to me in a different form in my daughter. And so it's, this is just a Rubik's Cube of past lifetimes fitting together, and my family basically following the trail of breadcrumbs to figure out how it all pieces together. But to have the tangible evidence of the family tree, and then to later find Henry and Sarah Cloud, to find them on an ancestral ancestor website, in an old census. And it's a long story. It's a bizarre one. I always say, they say that reality is stranger than fiction, and this story proves that.
Yeah, that's great. There's a lot of things there. So just firstly, I think for people, maybe some people watching this podcast, past life regression therapists, hypnotherapists, and that's something I don't talk a lot about on the podcast so far, but I'm really glad to have you on because I can now bring this up. And that's that there's this real interplay between the psychic medium world and the past life regression therapy world. So I really present a lot of my material and curriculum as being like, we're therapists and we don't have to be psychic to be therapists. And our clients don't have to be psychic to have past life recall. Although when we put somebody into a hypnotic state, they tend to become psychic and that they can remember their past lives. And there actually are a lot of past life regression therapists who are psychic to one degree or another. And that is actually pretty helpful in their practice. And for clients, they don't have to be psychics to have past life regression, but often they do have abilities to one degree or another. And that helps make them good subjects for past life regression. It's very complementary. So one thing, even when I'm looking with people say I've got certain like family issues, and I think, well, we'll just do hypnotherapy. If you don't have a real connection to past life regression, why? But for psychics tend to. So they become very good clients for past life regression. And even as you mentioned, like there are some things where like you know that you're going to have a daughter, but it's like you're not given the information that it's also going to be your daughter. You can
Right,
you,
right.
you can tell your female client, but it's like, so there are certain things that are withheld for very good reasons. And then there is also sort of validation or extra information that can come through as well. So you have a really strong hunch as a psychic that I had this past life, and then for someone else in a regression to come up with the matching information, it's just so complementary. So I think this connection between the past life therapist world and the psychic world is really strong. And so it's good to see the interplay that's happening in your experience there.
And yeah, it is interesting, like you said, how people seemingly become more psychic under hypnosis. It's almost like they're tapping into a part of themselves that was either shut down or they weren't aware of. But down there in the basement of our soul somewhere, on some level, we subconsciously remember these past lifetimes. I just feel like perhaps we're born into each new lifetime with a little bit of amnesia, which prevents us from recalling the past. And perhaps that's a good thing. I mean, our head is overflowing. Like we can't even keep the facts of this lifetime straight. Like, okay, what's on my schedule for this week? What did I forget to do? Can you imagine if we had a conscious recollection of all of our past lifetimes on top of that? It would be one big garbled mess inside of our head. We'd be getting our lifetimes confused.
Yeah, I think that's part of what
Yeah.
makes awakening difficult, is it's pretty overwhelming and
Yeah.
confusing. But also, actually, is she psychic herself to some degree or another?
Yeah, Kenzie. Well, since the book came out, we're actually no longer together. We remain very close, and in fact, she's one of my very best friends. But she is intuitive. She's very psychic. There's a couple other premonitions and visions and synchronicities that occurred in the story of her foreseeing events before they actually happened. And yeah, and actually in her tribe, in the Sioux tribe, the Lakota Sioux tribe, they call the intuitive individuals, they call them sun dancers. People who are close to the spirit world, people who have this gift. So yeah, and it got passed along to our daughter as well. Sky is now 7 years old, and she's fully aware of the concept of past lifetimes, and she understands what I do for a living, and that I talk to spirits and help people. And in fact, Sky's she sometimes senses the deceased pets of the client that I'm about to meet with, and she always asks me to see if I can verify and validate what she's sensing as true. Like, did the family lose a little white cat, or did they recently have a German Shepherd that passed away? And yeah, more often than not, the information checks out. So Sky has a little bit of that sun dancer tendency within her as well.
Okay, it's a nice childlike thing for her to fixate on the pets.
Yeah, of course.
In real life, they often ignore the people, the adults around, and go straight to the animals. So,
Yeah.
so funny to do that in spirit as well. You may even mentioned children are kind of notorious for having past life recall. A number of people find that their children start speaking about these kind of things. So, when were the first inklings?
Yeah, for her, it happened the week before her third birthday. which is right on cue, because I always tell people in my lectures throughout the years, children seem to be most psychic between the ages of 3 and 4. Now, sometimes that lingers into 5, 6, and 7, but there's something magical about that little 2-year window when they're 3 and 4 years old, because they're still so pure and innocent, and their intuition is raw, and they're just these angelic little psychic beings. But at 3 and 4, they're finally articulate enough to verbalize and to share what they're thinking, feeling, and seeing. And many times what they're remembering and seeing has significant spiritual implications for us all. It's the age where they typically tend to remember who they used to be in past lifetimes. It's where they remember what the in between was like. You call that heaven or the other side or the afterlife. That gap, that time period between lifetimes, whether that's 10 years or 50 years or however long that gap is, they remember being there, and they remember seeing people they were with. And so at 3 and 4 years old, when they just casually they speak of deceased relatives that they never had the chance to meet, and it just leaves the parents and grandparents just absolutely stunned that a child would mention, Grandpa Bob, for example, who they never met, and they could tell you all about Bob because they had many conversations with him before they were even born. So yeah, age 3 and 4. For my daughter, and this is kind of at the end of the story, so I won't give the spoiler away, but for my daughter, she was seeing things, objects and items and pictures around the house that she shouldn't know what they were or who they belonged to, and she would point to them and she would say, that's mine. I used to have that. That belonged to me. She would see a picture of an old house that belonged to somebody in my family, and she would say, I used to live there a long time ago. She would see a picture of, a deceased relative of mine, and she claimed that she missed them. And I would say, oh, sweetheart, you never got a chance to meet that person because they passed away a long time ago. And she said, yes, I do know him, and I miss him, and I love him. I want to see more pictures. And so, it's just, it's things like that give you goosebumps. It's, children, knowing things that they could not possibly know. Another thing at age 3, I was snuggling on the couch with my daughter Sky, and I was sipping coffee out of a coffee mug that I got in New York City, and it showed taxis and buildings, and she looked curious. She was studying my coffee mug, so I said, hey, do you want to see other pictures of New York City? And she said, yeah. So I pulled out my phone and did an internet search, and up popped a picture of the Twin Towers, pre 9/11, of course. And she's looking at the Twin Towers and she's studying it, and she looks really disheartened. She looks really upset. And I said, aren't those buildings really pretty? And she points to the top of the buildings and she says, airplanes. And at that moment, when I shared that at one of my lectures, and people were like, does she remember? Like, on some level, was she somebody else in a past lifetime who was alive on September 11th, and she remembers the airplanes crashing into the buildings? And but it's moments like that where children, they seem to know more than they should. They seem to be wise beyond their years, and they seem to have memories that aren't entirely their own. It's in my opinion, that has profound spiritual implications for all of us. It proves that not only do we survive death, but that we get a chance to come back as many times as we want. And sometimes we choose to come back to the same family, which that makes it easier to piece together past life clues when you reincarnate back into your own family tree.
Yeah, and that is really the big key, isn't it? It's the implication. So there's the message that they're getting, but then it's who they're giving it to. And so what were the implications? How did those messages hit home and affect your life?
Well, I'll never forget the day that, again, it was the week before her 3rd birthday, when she pointed to an object and say, that used to belong to me. I gave that to you. For me, I just started crying. I just had this overflow of emotions where suddenly, it clicked, and I realized who she was, and that she had come back to me. But from a rational standpoint, and Kenzie obviously being a big believer in, psychic abilities and past lifetimes, we made a pact, we made a deal that we weren't going to overreact if Sky said additional interesting things about past life memories, because we didn't want it to become a game. We didn't want to subconsciously implant ideas into Sky's head as to who she used to be. We just wanted her to focus on being a kid and having fun and just focusing about this lifetime. And even now, as she's grown, and it's 4 years later, she's 7 years old, and she'll sometimes bring it up. She'll talk about past lives, and she'll say, "Dad, can you use your psychic abilities and tell me what was?" And I just, I give her a hug and a kiss, and I said, "Sweetheart, someday you'll have to read my book when you're a little bit older." But I think that for anybody, not just Sky, but for anybody who has children or grandchildren who are having past life memories, the most important thing is to make them feel listened to make them feel safe, to make them feel understood, to ask open-ended questions rather than leading questions. You don't want to subconsciously influence a child's opinions, and just listen to them, make sure they feel loved and accepted, make sure that they know that they're free to share anything, even if it's something they can't quite make sense of. So I think that's the most important thing. And I think that's the beauty of an intuitive child being born into an open-minded family. We were very familiar with past lives, so we knew the implications. On the flip side, it's kind of sad to imagine, in other parts of the country or other parts of the world, intuitive children with past life memories born into a closed-minded or conservative family who just chalks it up to having a vivid imagination. So it's really important that we listen to our children. And I always say, if you're looking for wisdom, talk to a kid under the age of 10, because that's where you're going to find the most wisdom. We adults, we grow up and our heads gets filled with all sorts of nonsense, and we lose some of that pureness that kids are prone to.
Yeah, I was going to ask you actually, how do you manage, or do you have any advice for people who find their children as talking about past lives? And the first part is, listen, don't close them down, don't shut it down. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you mentioned not going overboard with it. So how do you manage that, not getting too drawn into it, or and still letting them be, little children? And what advice do you give for people who might be too infatuated with the idea of them as excessively spiritual beings, or getting too attached to their past lives?
Yeah, it would almost be a disservice to a child if you treated them like an adult. As we know, the world we live in with technology and everything just moves at the speed of light, and kids grow up too fast as it is. So we don't want to have them grow up faster than needed. And we also don't want to, even if you discover who a child was or who you suspect they were in a previous lifetime, you certainly don't want to treat them like the previous version of themselves, because it wouldn't be fair. Each new lifetime is just that. It's a fresh start. It's a blank canvas. It's a brand new opportunity to create our lives in a slightly different way, so that we can view the world through a slightly different lens. So yeah, we just treat her like a kid. We make sure that whatever she wants to share, she's welcome to share, and just try not to make a big deal out of it. Just a year or so ago, I was driving around town with Sky. We were running some errands, and we pulled up next to a really interesting looking vehicle. It was like a Jeep or some sort of truck, but it was really old fashioned and unique looking. I think it was from long ago. And Sky looks at it and she goes, "Huh, that's weird." And I say, "What's weird?" And she says, "See that truck? That's how they looked like that's what they looked like in the 1930s. And I said, "Huh." I said, "How do you know what anything looked like in the 1930s? You were born in 2014. And she says, "I don't know. I just remember." And I say, "Oh, okay. Well, what else do you remember?" And I could see her thinking. And she said, "I'm not really sure. I remember what they look like." And so I just wrapped up the conversation by saying, "Well, that's really interesting. Feel free to tell me if you remember anything more." So, and it's just as simple as that. Kids, they tend to lose interest if we pry too much, if we try to, evaluate and dissect what they've said, they'll lose interest and change the subject, or they'll skip off and watch cartoons. That's just, they have short attention spans. But yeah, it's, you got to find that delicate balance between being interested and not overreacting, being supportive, but don't be leading. So, and generally speaking, people have enough self-awareness to find that balance.
Yeah. And do you do any work to help develop her at the moment? Do you plan to do some in the future when she comes of age, for example, or do you, like, just as you did, you had experiences when you were young, and then you have, as an adult, there's sort of some breakthrough experiences. You just like going to let them play out for her. If they do, they do. If they don't, they don't. What's your way forward with it?
Well, it's always an open conversation. She's remarkably intuitive, and I think part of that is she's remarkably empathetic. She's just a very kind-hearted person, and I don't know. I think you would probably agree with this, Mark. It seems like through observation, I've noticed people who are very kind, they tend to be very intuitive as well, almost like those two qualities go hand in hand. But yeah, if Sky shows an interest in wanting to actively develop her psychic abilities as she gets older, I'd certainly work with her in any capacity I could. But I feel like her destiny is not the same as mine. I don't think she's going to follow suit and become a psychic medium. I think she has her own destiny, and I think that destiny has to do with working with animals. It's what I predicted the first day that I ever met Kenzie and told her about this special daughter, that she was going to work with animals. And since she was old enough to speak, Sky claims that she's going to work with animals. And she used to say she was going to be a veterinarian, but nowadays she says she's going to educate children in classrooms about the importance of wildlife conservation, and she's going to travel the country in an RV full of critters for demonstrations and displays. And so I don't know, there's a lot of free will between 7 years old and adulthood, but I just have a hunch that she's going to stick with this one. And having intuition, regardless of what profession she chooses, it's a valuable resource. Whether a person becomes a counselor or a nurse or a past life, regression expert or a wildlife conservationist, having intuition is it just helps you be more in tune with the people who you come in contact with, which would serve you well in any profession, I think.
Oh, that's great. And so you've touched on, a number of elements. What would you say are some of the key themes of the book?
There is a lot of synchronicity. If you're the kind of person who likes, I don't like the word coincidence. Coincidence is like a dirty word, because I think significant things happen in our life, and when they defy statistical probability of like, wow, how in the world did that happen? What are the odds to be at the right place at the right time to witness something that has spiritual implications? It's a synchronicity. And there's so many synchronicities in this book. I think it's part of it's rooted in fate and destiny. Past lives obviously is one of the main themes. Guardian angels are pop up in just about every chapter. But it's also about family. It's about fatherhood. We discovered through various well, that's another story, but we discovered about halfway through this book that we were not supposed to be able to have children. There was some medical complications. Doctors said odds were slim to none. So there was a lot of soul searching. There was some struggles and heartache as we tried to bring Sky into the world. And it's about the emotional roller coaster that ensues when you become a new parent. It's the raw, gritty, unfiltered, journey that we took as parents. The sleepless nights, the moments, where trying to balance life as a psychic medium while you're up all night changing diapers and not getting any sleep. So it's really a behind the scenes, all access invitation to view my life. And but yeah, if you like past lives, if you like guardian angels, synchronicity, miracles, signs from the afterlife, if you're the kind of person who looks for meaning and finds things like that faith affirming, I think the Sky Diaries will be right up your alley. And again, probably say this again before we're done speaking, but anyone who's interested can purchase a copy on Amazon on January 11th. That's the day the book is released, both in paperback and ebook. And there's even some rumblings of it potentially becoming a movie someday. That's getting a couple steps ahead of ourselves, but there's been talk of that with some people that have links to Hollywood. So I hope it's well received. And some of the proofreaders who have helped me with the editing, some of them got through all 350 some pages in one sitting. They just said it was a page turner and it was a unique story. And I hope anybody who picks it up feels the same, because I mean, heck, after the holidays come January 11th, there's not much to do until springtime. So, after the holiday lull, if you're looking for something to lift your spirits and to kind of get you through that part of the year, hopefully this book does it for you.
Great. And one thing I like as well is, people often have spiritual insights, but for me, even as a therapist, it's really important that they're connected to visceral, real, present moment, this life, human experience. So people can get off into the spiritual experience trip and get into the clouds and sort of detach or escape from or not really connect to their real present life, their family. But this brings it all back. So all the spiritual lessons and experiences are very grounded in the everyday reality of human beings living their lives. I think that's really important. And so just to that point, this book it's not a novelization. It's not based on a true story. It is nonfiction. It's a true story. Every word of it happened. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes, and it's 100% true story. I've yet to write a fictional book. I may someday, but even if I did, I could not dream up a story this complex and this insane. It's quite literally stranger than fiction. But it is 100% true story. And I was very careful with the wording. I didn't want to say based on a true story, because when you hear based on a true story, that means there was some creative liberties taken, for the sake of excitement. Everything in here is 100% true. And yeah, it's my life story. It's a memoir. It's a story. I will never be able to write another book like this, not in this lifetime anyway. So this one will always be special, near and dear to my heart. And it's kind of a legacy, it's an heirloom that I can leave to Sky. She has a copy sitting on her bedroom shelf right now. It'll collect dust for a few years until she's old enough to read it. But it's the most important physical item that I'll leave behind when my time here on this crazy planet is done. But yeah, it's been quite a trip, I tell you what.
Okay, actually, you did mention a near-death experience before that was part of an awakening to your psychic abilities and things, but was there a connection to that with past lives?
Yeah, my near-death experience was not. It didn't have anything to do with past lifetimes. Basically, when I saw the universe and the cosmos through my bedroom ceiling, it was just this feeling of euphoric peace on a level that I don't even have the words to describe. But it was just the complete absence of fear and anxiety. And one of the messages that was conveyed to me from this higher power was that if I wanted to be reunited with my dad and everyone who had passed before me, all I needed to do was float up through my ceiling into the universe. And I did. I felt my spirit leave my body. And right as I was floating above my bed on the verge of the ceiling, I that's when I had the change of heart and changed my mind. And that's where I felt my physical body slam back and merge with my spirit. And I woke up gasping for air. But it's kind of, I didn't know anything about near-death experiences at the time, but often when people, have a close call and live to tell about it, they do go through some sort of spiritual awakening, whether that's becoming more intuitive or more interested in the afterlife, or they feel more connected to people in a way that's hard to describe. In fact, some people, which was the case for me, some people even fall into a slight funk or a minor depression following their experience, because when you stand on the doormat of the afterlife and you feel how wonderful it really is, coming back to reality here on earth, it's almost like, getting a peek inside Disney World and then being sent back to live in the slums, so, but it has more benefits than drawbacks. That being said, I'd be happy if I never had another experience like that again, because I'd like to be here for many more years to come. So
Yeah, I had that experience myself of peeking in the window and not being particularly interested in coming back,
yeah.
but also feeling that it was necessary. So just go do what you got to do. But also, I was wanting to pick up on this before. Actually, you even mentioned your daughter was there talking to relatives that she couldn't possibly have, met or known that had passed away before she was born. And that's something as past life regression therapists, even with a near-death experience, you can be grounded in your reality with this is my daughter, this is my partner. And then here we are in past lives together. But then as past life therapists, we call it the between lives. We do between lives regression, the between lives realm. And that's where we're not in physically incarnated now or in the past, but we are in that between lives area and that's where as spiritual entities, we meet and discuss with each other. Oh, you are my father or brother in a past life. You'll be my daughter or wife in the next one. And we need to meet and I need to learn forgiveness. So please come and be mean to me
Yeah.
so I can have bad times. And so all those people we end up forgiving, we actually had an intention to go through those experiences. And that's also, part of that decision where, or certainly not always necessarily, there's some fate and free will involved, but probabilities. And so you've got that potential. And so is that something that you tune into, even some of the discussions or decisions that the three of you would have made as souls to incarnate in those various roles?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of people struggle to to wrap their head around how the dynamics can shift between one lifetime and the next, because our reference point, your husband or your wife, you've only known them as your husband and wife. It's weird to think, wow, maybe they were a sibling in a past life. Maybe they were a neighbor. Maybe they were a boss who was always on your case. But I think we get so wrapped up in the present moment. It's for some people, it's hard to imagine who we used to be. Um, I as a psychic medium, I don't do past life regressions, but what I do in my sessions is I can see into people's past lifetimes. I don't focus so much on the between lives, but to see past lives and to sometimes see some correlations as to, okay, your best friend, was your cousin in a past lifetime, or your current spouse was, there was some romance in a past life, but it never worked out. It never worked out like it did this time around. But for Kenzie and I think it was like history repeating itself. Apparently, living together as husband and wife in the 1800s. And I do have also uncovered that we took a lifetime apart, where she was living on the West Coast and I was living in New York in the early 1900s. So that can happen as well, I feel, where you take a break from incarnating with people in your soul group, and then sometimes you take another turn with them again. And that's why it says on the back of my book, a family's love from one lifetime to the next, a family's love never truly ends. It just changes forms from one life to the next.
Yeah,
And,
that's exactly what I see doing past life regression therapy work, which is, so you've often got repeating patterns. So we were married and we come back and we're married again. I definitely see that repeating patterns, but also see balancing patterns. Well, we were lovers in one life and enemies in the other.
yeah.
And people think, it's better to be one, not the other. Well, not necessarily. It's all just part of the learning process. And then people often also assume that if we were married in one life, we should come back and in every single life be together and be married. But that's not what I see. I also see significant. My wife is the same. She has a number of lifetimes off from me,
Yeah.
and is quite happy to do so. She likes her own space in this life as well. And so, and that's not, a contradiction or any less loving or anything like that. It's just there are other things to be done, and that's how it goes. So that's all pretty consistent with what I see in regression as well. And so you mentioned other synchronicities. And so that's where it gets interesting as well, between you've got so many threads and so many connections. So were there any other key synchronicities that stood out for you?
Well, and that's a good way to put it. Threads. It was a hard book to write. I've never written a book that was one continuous story. Most of my books, my previous books, have like a standalone chapter where it's more educational in nature. But this was one continuous story that involves multiple lifetimes and multiple people. But yeah, synchronicities galore. There's some examples in there about how my dad passed away in 1997. And as my daughter was born, we slowly discovered that one of her guardian angels is my dad, Steve. And he was very timely in making his presence known, through song, through messages, through helping us avoid a car accident. For example, one of the quote unquote signs that we have attributed to my dad is that every time we hear a song called Spirit in the Sky by Norman Greenbaum, that's him. That's his way of trying to say hello and get our attention. And one example in the story is we were in a busy intersection here in Omaha driving, and Kenzie was, she was about 6 or 7 months pregnant with Sky. And I had this feeling of impending dread. And I was looking at this silver pickup truck, and there was this voice in my head, which now I know was my dad, but he was like, don't take your eyes off that truck. And I didn't, thank goodness. And I slammed on the brakes, and the truck blew through a red light and just missed us by an inch. Had I not been listening to my dad's voice in my head, the truck would have plowed directly into Kenzie's door. Probably that would have jeopardized the whole pregnancy. But thankfully, we survived that close call. And just a couple seconds after that near miss, I had a inkling in my head to turn on the radio, which was a very strange thing to do, considering my heart was still racing and I didn't even feel like listening to music. But I turned on the radio, and sure enough, playing on the radio at that moment was Spirit in the Sky. So just a synchronicity of, right time, right place, a demonstration of how people who we've loved and lost can still be helpful and a protective influence in our life, and the ways in which they communicate with us. It varies through dreams, through music. There's examples of them moving physical objects around the house. All of these are mentioned in my book as things that we've witnessed over the years of our loved ones trying to get our attention. So yeah, synchronicities, that's probably one of the top 5 words I would use to describe the theme of this book.
Okay, and so even in talking about guardian angels, it sounds like a lot of those are what I would even call members of a soul group. And they're often family members or people that you reincarnate with frequently, or often family or certainly friends. So is that how you see them? And do you see a distinction between guardian angels and maybe something like a spirit guide? And for me, maybe a spirit guide is an entity who doesn't or hasn't reincarnated for some significant amount of time. So do you see a distinction between that kind of wording? Or
I have a bad habit of using those words interchangeably. So I'll say guardian angel and spirit guide. And in my opinion, I'm kind of referring to the same thing. So they're people who have lived a lifetime here on Earth at one point in time, so they know what it's like to be human.
Yeah.
But being in the between lives phase, they can keep tabs on us and help us and protect us to help us navigate our current lifetime. And I do think that sometimes in special circumstances, a deceased loved one, such as my dad, can be a guardian angel for Sky. They never met in life, not in this one anyway, because my dad passed in 1997 and Sky was born in 2014. But they can still be active in a child's life by signing up to be the role of guardian angel, and in doing so, they kind of don't miss out on all those good opportunities to be a participant in that child's life. So, and then in other cases like mine with Henry, he was Henry and Sarah, they were, our past life Native American buddies. And so they're taking a break from having an incarnation on Earth to keep tabs on us and keep us out of trouble. So yeah, it all fits together, and it's like a big puzzle piece. You just have to figure out where every part goes.
Right. Do you feel that Henry last incarnation was a few hundred years ago? Do you feel that he's continuing to reincarnate, or he will reincarnate in future? And what's been happening with him?
That's a good question. I hope he's had some adventures between the 1800s and nowadays. And truth be told, obviously he would have gone by a different name with the new lifetime. So perhaps my calling him Henry and still seeing what he looked like in that Native American past lifetime is just my reference point for him. So, that's an interesting thing too, not to get off on a tangent, but, people's appearances. Obviously we get a new body, we have a new look with each new lifetime. So I've always theorized that sometimes, for people who are active dreamers and remember their dreams, you might relate to this, but if you've ever dreamt about a person, let's say your brother Scott, and you knew it was Scott in the dream, but he looked completely different. He looked like somebody else, but you felt his energy as your brother Scott. I theorize that when that happens, you're actually seeing the previous look of somebody, like what they used to look like in a past lifetime of theirs. So their energy is the same, but their appearance is different.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And that's in regression. That's what we often see. And it always kind of a little bit surprising to me in a way that someone will see somebody who's a different gender, different race, different everything. And they go, oh, that's Tim. It's like, I guide them and just say, look at that person, tune into their energy. And it is that energy that people pick up on. It's their essence, and they can the ease with which they look past all of the physical externalities and are able to tune into, oh, that's that person, just although they look completely different. So yeah, we find that in regression as well. So yeah, so you mentioned being in Nebraska. So that's another thing with that in terms of synchronicities or even repeating patterns, the geography that you're born into it. So it seems like you've returned to around about similar places. I guess Nebraska and the Lakota, maybe is that a little bit different in terms of the main states? And so how was there sort of connections geographically and culturally, and even the Native American connection that you've mentioned? How was that particularly meaningful for the journey and the stories that unfolded?
Yeah, it's interesting. Geography obviously plays a big role when we're talking past lifetimes. As far as the Native American past lifetime that Kenzie and I shared in the 1800s, we're pretty certain that it was somewhere in the South Dakota area, which is very close to Nebraska. And in fact, it's kind of funny too, when you get back to certain places that you've lived before, it feels familiar every time. Just this past summer, I was vacationing in South Dakota, and just the whole area just gives me deja vu. It just feels so familiar in ways that I can't describe. And that actually stems all the way back to my youth. And that's chapter 2 in my book. Is I remember being 9 or 10 years old, and the movie Dances with Wolves, starring Kevin Costner, that came out in theaters right around that time. And I was so fascinated with that movie. It unlocked something within me, because during the movie, they're speaking the Sioux language, they're speaking the Dakota language. And I remembered the lines from the movie. I would run around and I would be like talking Dakota, and I didn't know how. I was just so fascinated with that movie. And I remember I even found a plastic tomahawk in my neighborhood, and I would just throw it at things in my backyard, pretending I was hunting buffaloes. And then, growing into an adult and discovering these past life connections. And I'm thinking, wow, no wonder I was so fascinated with Native American culture growing up, because it stemmed back to the past life in South Dakota. Um, as for somebody who reincarnates back into their own family tree in a relatively short amount of time, geographically, not much changes. In fact, I won't give the story away, but Sky, again, when she was 3 and 4 years old, I was scrolling through Facebook on my phone, and she saw a house that I had a picture of a house, and she pointed at it, and it was a house that used to belong to one of my family members. And she said, "Wow, I used to live there." I said, "Well, yeah." It's like, how do you respond to that? I'm like, oh, wow, that's interesting. What else do you remember? And of course, she lost interest, and she, skipped down the hallway to play with her toys. So yeah, geography is interesting. And I always say that's the cool thing about living in today's world. We are inundated with Netflix, Google searches, movie, TV shows, and all of this media exposes us to past life, potentially to past life events that are going to trigger a sense of deja vu. Whether it's a specific period in history, a specific geographic location around the world, or a specific year, or an event like the Titanic, or Renaissance England, or the what have you. We see these things and for entertainment, and then it's like, wow, that really makes me feel like I've been there before.
So you've written 3 books previously. So if people want to go check out your back catalog, there's plenty there. Can you tell us a bit about those 3 books collectively, or how this
Yeah,
fourth book takes another step?
sure. Well, actually, my first book is referenced quite a few times actually in the Sky Diaries, because my first book, it's called Flying Paint Rollers from Heaven. I know it's kind of a goofy title, but it's kind of just a hodgepodge of all things spiritual, metaphysical, paranormal. And at the very end of that book, as we were actively trying to have a baby, we were trying to conceive Sky, and due to some of those medical issues, it didn't seem likely. And I remember I was trying to figure out how to wrap up the end of Flying Paint Rollers from Heaven, and I can't believe I was so bold to do this. It sounds crazy in hindsight, but at the very end of that book, I wrote that during the publication of this book, Andy and Kenzie learned they were pregnant with their first child, and it's a girl. And so we wrote it. It was being published. It wasn't true at the moment that I wrote it, but as the book actually was released when Kenzie was like 7 months pregnant with Sky, and thankfully it became a true premonition. But yeah, it was kind of my unique way of trying to manifest Sky into reality by just assuming, hey, she's coming, she can hear me, she's getting ready to come into the world. I'm just going to write it in a book and make it true. And so that was my first one, Flying Paint Rollers from Heaven. My second one was called Inspiration A to Z. And that's kind of just an uplifting take on everyday life. It's looking for positivity in places where others may find none. And my third book was Not Your Average Angel book. So it kind of goes very much into detail about how we can communicate and establish a relationship with our guardian angels or spirit guides. And the book is also loaded with a lot of angelic miracle stories that I've heard from clients over the years. You know, people who survived disaster, only to find out that the person who pulled them to safety was disappeared, in the blink of an eye, kind of stories. And again, those are all on my website. But the main thing I want to tell everybody about the Sky Diaries, again, January 11th, 111, right after the new year. That's when you can order your copy on Amazon. And anyone who orders a copy on January 11th, the incentive behind this is ordering a copy will grant you free access into a special event that I'm doing. It's called a Heaven on Earth gallery reading, and it's an audience event where I call on members of the audience and relay messages from their deceased loved ones. And I'm actually doing 2 of these for book purchasers. One will be live in person in Omaha, in January, and then the other one will be on Zoom for people nationwide. So if anyone buys a copy in Australia, England, wherever you live, you can still participate for free. All you have to do is email my office a copy of your purchase. A screenshot from your phone would do, and we'll give you free access to those events. Anyone who buys more than one copy is going to be in the running actually for a family session. So that's round up 5 of your closest family members, and you get to spend a whole evening with me, either in person or on Zoom. And it's very private, very intimate, guaranteed to have some messages coming through from your deceased loved ones. So, that's a little incentive for people to buy more than one copy to get a chance to win that opportunity. And either way, I think a lot of people are excited to buy it, and I'm excited. It's surreal to see it, coming down the home stretch. I wrote the book for 2 years. I've been editing and tweaking it for 3 additional years. Obviously, Sky was, she was just so little when I wrote it, and now she's 7 and she'll be at the book signing, handing out copies. It's just been a really long process, and it's just makes me emotional, that we're finally getting towards the tail end where people can actually read this story, because quite literally, I've been talking about Sky since before she was born. Everybody's been following this story, since before Sky was even conceived. So a lot of people they've heard bits and pieces of the story, but they've never heard the whole thing. So again, all the nitty gritty details are within the pages of this. And I hope whoever reads it, I hope it changes your life in some small way.
Okay, great. So do go and check out andymyersonline.com. So you can find out a lot about the events that he's doing and his contacts. And yeah, and so congratulations, Andy. It's a long journey to get a book done. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, we keep joking. It's been 150 years in the making.
Okay.
So, but I appreciate it. It's been so much fun being on.
Yeah, well, it's been great to hear your story. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Okay. Have a good one, Mark.
Thanks for listening or watching. To find out more about my guest, see the links in the description for details. If you're interested in having personal sessions or certification training, visit my website, the pastlifeawakeninginstitute.com, for details. Thanks so much for watching or listening, and see you next time.